I watched through my living room window as Karen Pemberton backed her pearl white Lexus into my driveway at 9 in the morning, popped the trunk, and started loading my Craftsman tool chest into her vehicle like she owned the thing. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips as I processed what was happening, and by the time my brain caught up to reality, she was already closing her trunk with a satisfied smile plastered across her surgically tightened face. I burst through my front door, still wearing my bathrobe and slippers, and jogged across the lawn of my modest ranch house in Greenfield, Ohio. The subdivision called Meadowbrook Heights had seemed like such a peaceful place when I moved in 2 years ago. But that was before I understood the true nature of our Home Owners Association and its president, Karen Pemberton. The woman had made it her personal mission to control every aspect of our neighborhood, from the exact shade of beige we could paint our mailboxes to the height of our grass, which apparently needed to be measured with scientific precision. "Karen, what the hell are you doing with my tools?" I shouted as she climbed into her driver's seat. She rolled down her window with an exaggerated sigh, looking at me like I was a particularly dim child. "Good morning, Wesley. I am confiscating these items as per HOA Regulation 7.3-B. You left this tool chest visible in your garage yesterday evening, which constitutes unsightly storage and violates our community standards." "That's theft," I said, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "You cannot just take my property." "I can, and I did." "You will get your items back once you pay the fine and attend the mandatory HOA meeting next Tuesday to discuss your repeated violations." She started rolling up her window. "Karen, I am calling the police right now." She laughed, actually laughed, and shook her head. "Go ahead, Wesley. The Greenfield Police Department knows me very well. I volunteer at their charity events. Good luck with that." Then she drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway in my bathrobe, watching my $800 tool chest disappear down Maple Avenue. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 anyway. My hands were shaking with anger as the dispatcher answered. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice probably betrayed how furious I was. The dispatcher told me an officer would be by within the hour to take a report. While I waited, I changed into jeans and a flannel shirt, then made myself another cup of coffee to replace the one that had gone cold. My mind was racing through every interaction I had ever had with Karen Pemberton since moving to Meadowbrook Heights. The woman was in her late 40s, divorced, with 2 adult children who never visited as far as I could tell. She had become HOA president about 5 years ago, according to my neighbor Tom, and had been making everyone's lives miserable ever since. There was the time she fined the Hendersons $300 because their Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd. The time she threatened to put a lien on the Martinez family's house because their teenage son's basketball hoop was 6 inches too close to the street. The time she made elderly Mrs. Chen replant her entire garden because the flowers were not on the approved list of acceptable plants. The list went on, but this was the first time she had actually stolen something of mine. Sure, she had slapped me with fines before, like the $100 penalty for having my garbage cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, which happened because I got home late from work. But physically taking my property, that was a new level of audacity. Officer Mike Reynolds showed up 45 minutes later in his patrol car. He was a stocky guy in his mid-30s with a military-style haircut and a professional demeanor. I invited him inside and explained everything that had happened, showing him the video footage from my doorbell camera that clearly captured Karen loading my tool chest into her trunk. Reynolds watched the footage twice, taking notes in his little pad. "This is pretty cut and dry," he said. "That is definitely theft. I know Karen Pemberton, and between you and me, we have had complaints about her before." "Really?" I leaned forward. "What kind of complaints?" He hesitated, probably weighing what he could and could not share. "Let me just say this is not the first time someone has accused her of taking property under the guise of HOA enforcement. Nothing has ever been prosecuted because people usually just pay her fines and get their stuff back. But you have got video evidence here, which changes things." "I want to press charges," I said firmly. Reynolds nodded. "I will need you to come down to the station and make a formal statement. I am also going to go have a conversation with Mrs. Pemberton right now. Do you know where she lives? 2 streets over on Oak Drive. The house with the fountain in the front yard. You cannot miss it." After Reynolds left, I called my buddy Jake, who was a lawyer, though he specialized in corporate law rather than criminal matters. Still, he knew more about the legal system than I did. I explained the situation while pacing around my kitchen. "Dude, that is insane," Jake said. "But yeah, press charges. Do not let her bully you into dropping this. People like that only stop when someone finally stands up to them. You want me to recommend a good lawyer if this goes further?" "Maybe. Let me see what happens with the police first." I spent the rest of the morning doing research online about HOA powers and limitations in Ohio. Turns out, while HOAs can fine residents for violations and even place liens on properties in extreme cases, they absolutely cannot just confiscate personal property. That required either consent or a court order. Karen had way overstepped her authority, and she probably knew it but had been getting away with it for so long that she thought she was untouchable. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Officer Reynolds. "Mr. Orman, I just left Mrs. Pemberton's residence. I need you to know something important that came up during my investigation." "What is it?" "When I went to retrieve your tool chest, I noticed several other items in her garage that appeared to be confiscated property. I asked her about them, and she became very defensive. Long story short, I contacted some of your neighbors, and it turns out at least 7 other residents have had items taken by Mrs. Pemberton over the past year. Some got their stuff back after paying fines, but others never did." My jaw dropped. "So she has been running some kind of theft operation disguised as HOA enforcement." "That is what it is starting to look like. I have got your tool chest secured as evidence, and I am opening a broader investigation. This could be bigger than just your case. Can you come down to the station this afternoon to give your statement?" "Absolutely. I will be there in an hour." At the Greenfield police station, I spent 2 hours going through everything in detail. Reynolds had me watch the doorbell footage again, sign several forms, and provide a written statement describing the incident and any previous interactions with Karen Pemberton. He also asked if I knew of any other neighbors who might have had similar experiences. "Talk to Jim Patterson on Willow Street," I said. "I remember him complaining at the community pool last summer that Karen took his lawn mower and he never got it back. He ended up just buying a new one because he did not want to deal with her." Reynolds wrote down the name. "This is exactly the kind of information we need. If you think of anyone else, let me know." As I was leaving the station, I ran into Tom Mitchell, my next-door neighbor, who was coming in. Tom was a retired accountant in his 60s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Wesley, I heard what happened," Tom said. "Officer Reynolds called me about some gardening equipment Karen took from my shed last spring. I never reported it because I figured it was not worth the hassle, but now I am thinking maybe I should." "You definitely should," I said. "Apparently she has been doing this to a lot of people." Tom shook his head in disgust. "I always knew she was a control freak, but I never thought she was a criminal. Over the next few days, word spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. It turned out that when people started comparing notes, Karen's pattern of behavior became impossible to ignore. She had taken a power washer from the Johnsons, claiming it was stored improperly. A ladder from the Ramirez family that was leaning against their garage. Electric hedge trimmers from at least 3 different houses. A pressure washer from the Carters. Even a children's playhouse from the Davies family, which she claimed was not on the approved structures list. Some people had gotten their items back after paying what amounted to ransom fees ranging from $50 to $300. Others had never seen their property again. When Officer Reynolds and his partner executed a search warrant on Karen's house and garage, they found a treasure trove of stolen goods. 17 different items belonging to 14 different homeowners in the subdivision. The local news picked up the story. I came home from work 3 days after the initial incident to find a news van parked on my street and a reporter named Jennifer Kowalski waiting on my doorstep. "Mr. Orman, I am Jennifer Kowalski from Channel 7 News. Can I ask you a few questions about the theft that occurred at your home?" I was not sure I wanted to be on television, but I also figured that public exposure might prevent something like this from happening to other people in other neighborhoods. "Sure, but keep it brief. I have had a long day." Jennifer was professional and asked straightforward questions about what happened and what I wanted people to know. "I think HOAs serve an important purpose," I said into the camera. "But when you get someone in charge who abuses their power, it can make people's lives miserable." What Karen Pemberton did was not enforcement of community standards. It was theft, plain and simple, and I am glad the police are taking it seriously. The segment aired that evening and apparently struck a nerve. The news station started getting calls from people in other subdivisions around the Columbus metropolitan area, with similar stories about their own HOA boards. It became a whole investigative series about HOA overreach and abuse. Karen Pemberton was arrested the following week and charged with multiple counts of theft. Because she had taken property from so many different people, and because the total value exceeded $10,000 when everything was added up, some of the charges were elevated to felony level. Ohio law was very clear about theft charges. Anything over $7,500 qualified as fourth-degree felony theft, which carried serious penalties. The preliminary hearing was held at the Madison County Courthouse in London, Ohio, about 20 minutes from Greenfield. I took a personal day from my job at the manufacturing plant to attend. The courtroom was packed with Meadowbrook Heights residents, many of whom were there to support the prosecution or to see justice served. Karen showed up with an expensive lawyer named Charles Hendrickson, who had slicked back hair, and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was wearing a conservative navy suit and had styled her blonde hair into a neat bun, clearly trying to look respectable and trustworthy. The transformation from the smug woman who had stolen my tools to this demure defendant was almost comical. The prosecution was being handled by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Sullivan, a sharp woman in her 30s with dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She laid out the charges methodically, presenting evidence of each individual theft, including photographs of the items recovered from Karen's garage, doorbell camera footage from multiple homes, and testimony from the victims. When it was the defense's turn, Hendrickson tried to argue that Karen had been acting within her authority as HOA president and that there had been a misunderstanding about the scope of her powers. "My client believed she was enforcing the community covenants and restrictions," he said. "She had no criminal intent. At most, This is a civil matter that should be resolved between the homeowners and the HOA board. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, was not buying it. Mr. Hendrickson, taking someone's property without permission and refusing to return it unless they pay money is not HOA enforcement. It is extortion and theft. Your client can believe whatever she wants about her authority, but ignorance of the law is not a defense. The hearing resulted in Karen being bound over for trial. Bail was set at $20,000, which she posted through a bondsman. As she left the courthouse, a group of reporters swarmed her, shouting questions. She kept her head down and hurried to her Lexus without saying a word. I felt a grim satisfaction watching her discomfort, but I also knew this was just the beginning of a long legal process. Criminal trials could take months or even years to resolve. What I did not know at that moment was that the investigation was about to take an even more serious turn. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Officer Reynolds called me again. "Wesley, I need to tell you something that is not public yet, but it will be soon. When we were investigating Karen Pemberton's activities, we noticed some financial irregularities in the HOA accounts. We brought in a forensic accountant to look at the books, and it turns out Karen has been embezzling money from the HOA for at least 3 years. You are kidding." I wish I was. She was funneling money into a personal account through fake vendor invoices and inflated service charges. We are talking about over $70,000. The FBI is getting involved because she was using wire transfers across state lines, which makes it federal wire fraud. I sat down heavily on my couch. So she was not just stealing physical property. She was stealing money from all of us too. Exactly. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights has been paying HOA dues that were partially going straight into her pocket. The new charges are going to be announced tomorrow. I wanted to give you a heads up since you were the one who really got the ball rolling on all of this. When the news broke the next day, the community exploded. People were furious. The HOA dues in Meadowbrook Heights were $250 per month, which was already considered high. Knowing that a significant portion of that money had been lining Karen's pockets for years was infuriating. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and the board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position as president and ban her from any future involvement in the association. The FBI's involvement meant the case got even more media attention. Jennifer Kowalski did a follow-up story, and this time several of my neighbors agreed to be interviewed. Tom Mitchell, who was usually a quiet and private person, spoke passionately about how betrayed he felt. "We trusted this woman to manage our community," Tom said to the camera. "We paid our dues faithfully every month, and she repaid that trust by stealing from us, not just our property but our money. It is unconscionable." The trial was scheduled for 6 months later, in late spring. During that time, Karen tried to maintain her normal routine, but it was impossible. Everyone in the neighborhood shunned her. People would cross the street to avoid her. When she went to the grocery store, people whispered and pointed. Her adult children, who apparently had not been aware of her crimes, distanced themselves publicly. Her son gave a statement to the press, saying he was shocked and disappointed by his mother's actions. I actually felt a tiny bit of sympathy for her during this period. But then, I would remember how smug she looked loading my tool chest into her trunk, how many people she had bullied and stolen from, and how she had been systematically embezzling money for years. Any sympathy evaporated quickly. The criminal trial began on a warm Tuesday morning in May. The courthouse in London was buzzing with activity. Aider Rachel Sullivan had built an airtight case. She had video evidence, financial records, testimony from multiple victims, expert witnesses from the forensic accounting firm, and even some damning emails Karen had sent to vendors coordinating her fake invoicing scheme. The prosecution spent 3 days presenting their case. I was called as a witness and testified about the morning Karen took my tool chest. The video from my doorbell camera was played for the jury, and I could see several jurors shaking their heads in disbelief as they watched Karen casually loading my property into her vehicle. Other neighbors testified about their experiences. Jim Patterson talked about his lawn mower that disappeared and was never returned. The Davies family described how their daughter cried when the playhouse vanished from their backyard. The financial expert explained in detail how Karen had created fake companies with names like Meadowbrook Landscaping Services and Heights Property Maintenance that existed only on paper. She would write checks to these fake companies, deposit them into accounts she controlled, and record the expenses in the HOA books as legitimate. The defense's strategy seemed to be throwing everything at the wall and hoping something stuck. Hendrickson argued that Karen had been under tremendous stress as HOA president, that she had mental health issues that clouded her judgment, that she had intended to return the items eventually, that the financial irregularities were accounting errors rather than deliberate theft. He brought in a psychologist who testified about how people in positions of authority can develop distorted thinking patterns, but none of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, and Karen herself came across as cold and unremorseful when she took the stand. Under cross-examination by Ada Sullivan, Karen tried to justify her actions, claiming that she had worked tirelessly for the community and deserved compensation beyond her modest HOA president's stipend. "So you believe you were entitled to help yourself to tens of thousands of dollars from the HOA accounts?" Sullivan asked. "I believe my work was undervalued," Karen responded stiffly, "and you felt entitled to take your neighbor's property if you deemed it unsightly." "I was enforcing the covenants." "By stealing," Hendrickson objected, but the damage was done. Karen had essentially admitted that she thought she was above the rules everyone else had to follow. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Karen guilty on all counts. 15 counts of theft related to the physical property, 1 count of felony theft for the aggregate value, and 3 counts of wire fraud related to the embezzlement scheme. The wire fraud convictions were the most serious, as they were federal charges that carried potential prison time of up to 20 years per count. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the HOA board filed a civil lawsuit against Karen to recover the embezzled funds. They also placed a lien on her house, the one with the elaborate fountain in the front yard that she had always been so proud of. At the sentencing hearing, victims were given the opportunity to make impact statements. I stood up and addressed the court, looking directly at Karen as I spoke. "Your Honor, what Karen Pemberton did to me and my neighbors was not just about stolen property or stolen money. It was about violating trust. When you live in a community like ours, you have to believe that the people in charge are looking out for everyone's interests, not their own. Karen abused her position for years, bullying people, stealing from them, and enriching herself at everyone's expense. I hope the sentence reflects the seriousness of her crimes and sends a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." 8 other people gave similar statements. By the end, Karen was crying, but they looked like tears of self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Judge Morrison delivered the sentence with a grim expression. "Mrs. Pemberton, you were entrusted with a position of responsibility and you exploited it for personal gain. Your actions demonstrate a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and theft that spans years. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated criminal behavior. The judge sentenced Karen to 5 years in federal prison for the wire fraud charges, to be served concurrently with a 2-year sentence on the state theft charges. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA in the amount of $73,000 for the embezzled funds, plus individual restitution to each victim for the value of their stolen property. The total restitution came to over $85,000. Additionally, Karen was ordered to sell her house to satisfy the civil judgment and the restitution orders. The house was valued at around $350,000, and after the mortgage was paid off and the restitution was satisfied, there would be little left. Karen's attorney immediately filed an appeal, but legal experts said the case was so solid that the appeal had virtually no chance of success. As the bailiffs led Karen away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that justice had been served, satisfaction that she would face consequences for her actions, but also a strange emptiness. None of this brought back the peace and sense of community that Meadowbrook Heights had lost. The subdivision would take years to recover from the scandal if it ever fully did. The story might have ended there, but there was one more twist. About a week after the sentencing, Officer Reynolds called me again. By this point, I was starting to dread his calls because they always meant some new complication. "Wesley, I thought you should know that we discovered something else during the final sweep of Karen's financial records. This is her 16th theft conviction." "What? How is that possible?" "The trial only covered the incidents in Meadowbrook Heights." "That is what we thought too. But when the FBI ran a comprehensive background check, they found that Karen lived in 3 other states over the past 20 years: Florida, Arizona, and Michigan. She had theft convictions in each of those states. Small stuff mostly, shoplifting and petty theft, but in Michigan, she had been convicted of stealing from a previous HOA where she served as treasurer. She served probation for that one. I was stunned. So she had a pattern of this behavior going back decades. Exactly. And here is the thing. Under federal sentencing guidelines, someone with that many prior convictions can receive an enhanced sentence. The prosecutor is filing a motion to reconsider the sentence based on this new information. Karen could be looking at significantly more prison time. How did this not come up during the trial? She used her maiden name in Florida and her first married name in Arizona and Michigan. It was not until the FBI did a deep dive with fingerprints and social security numbers that they connected all the dots. She basically reinvented herself each time she moved, and no one thought to dig that deep until now. The motion to reconsider was heard by Judge Morrison 2 weeks later. Ada Sullivan presented the evidence of Karen's prior convictions, including court records from Michigan showing that she had stolen over $30,000 from an HOA in Ann Arbor back in 2012. She had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and received probation plus restitution, which she apparently never fully paid. Judge Morrison was visibly angry as she reviewed the documents. "Mrs. Pemberton, you stood before this court and your attorney argued that this was aberrant behavior, that you had made mistakes under stress. But the reality is that you are a career criminal who has been stealing from people for at least 15 years. Your 16th conviction for theft demonstrates that you have no intention of changing your behavior." The judge vacated the original sentence and imposed a new one, 10 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8 years. Karen's face went white when she heard the new sentence. Her attorney tried to object, but the judge cut him off. The original sentence was based on incomplete information. Had I known about the defendant's extensive criminal history, I would never have been so lenient. This sentence is appropriate given the totality of the circumstances. Karen's house was sold at auction 3 months later. The buyer was actually a young couple with a new baby who seemed nice enough. They told me they got a good deal because of the property's history, and they planned to replace the fountain with a simple garden. I thought that was fitting. Something pretentious and showy being replaced with something genuine and humble. The HOA held elections for a new board, and Tom Mitchell was elected president. His first act was to revise the community covenants to limit the power of the HOA and establish checks and balances to prevent another Karen Pemberton situation. Fines were capped at $50 for first-time violations. There had to be photographic evidence of any violation, and residents were given 30 days to correct issues before any penalties were imposed. Most importantly, the HOA accounts were now reviewed quarterly by an independent auditor. My tool chest was returned to me along with a formal apology from the HOA board. Several neighbors threw a little celebration at the community center, which mostly involved beer, burgers, and people sharing their worst Karen Pemberton stories. It felt good to laugh about it, even though the situation had been genuinely awful. I learned some important lessons from the whole experience. First, never assume that someone in authority has your best interests at heart. Always ask questions and demand transparency. Second, document everything. If I had not had that doorbell camera footage, proving what Karen did would have been much harder. Third, standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it is difficult and time-consuming. If I had just paid Karen's fine and gotten my tools back, she would have continued victimizing other people indefinitely. The local media did one final follow-up story 6 months after Karen was sent to federal prison. Jennifer Kowalski interviewed several Meadowbrook Heights residents about how the community was healing and moving forward. I agreed to participate, and I said something that I had been thinking about a lot. What happened here was a wake-up call for everyone in HOAs, not just in our subdivision but everywhere. These organizations have real power over people's lives, and that power can be abused if there are not proper safeguards. I hope our story encourages other communities to take a hard look at their own HOA rules and make sure they are protecting homeowners, not enabling petty tyrants. The story resonated with people nationwide. I started getting emails from folks in other states who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Some were as bad as what we experienced, others were lesser issues, but all of them involved residents feeling powerless against boards that had forgotten they were supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. I even got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to make a film about HOA abuse, using our story as a central case study. I was not sure how I felt about that level of attention, but I told him I would think about it. Life in Meadowbrook Heights gradually returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. People were more engaged with the HOA now, attending meetings and asking questions. Tom Mitchell ran the organization with transparency and fairness, always remembering that he was a neighbor first and president second. Violations were handled with courtesy and common sense, rather than threats and extortion. I still think about that morning when I saw Karen loading my tool chest into her trunk. In some ways, it seems surreal now, like something that happened to someone else. But the lesson stuck with me. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them. Karen had been showing everyone in Meadowbrook Heights exactly who she was for years. But most people, including me, had chosen to just keep our heads down and avoid conflict. The 16th theft conviction, the lost house, the prison sentence, All of it could have been avoided if someone had stood up to Karen earlier. But I am glad it was my tool chest that finally brought everything crashing down. Sometimes one person saying enough is enough can change everything. Tom Mitchell and I became good friends after everything settled. We would have beers on his back patio on summer evenings and talk about everything from sports to politics to our families. One night, about a year after Karen's conviction, Tom said something that stuck with me. "You know, Wesley, I have been thinking about what happened with Karen. The real tragedy is not just what she did, but how many people she hurt who will never trust an HOA again. There are good reasons for these organizations to exist. They protect property values, maintain common areas, preserve the character of neighborhoods, but people like Karen poison the well for everyone." "So what is the answer?" I asked. Tom took a sip of his beer and stared out at his neatly trimmed lawn. "Vigilance, I guess, and participation. Most HOAs get taken over by petty tyrants because good people cannot be bothered to show up to meetings or run for the board. We all just want to live our lives and not deal with bureaucracy. But that apathy creates a vacuum, and people like Karen rush in to fill it." He was right. Since the scandal, meeting attendance in Meadowbrook Heights had increased from about 15 people to regularly over 60. Residents actually read the minutes and asked questions. The HOA had become what it was always supposed to be, a democratic organization run by and for the homeowners. I also reconnected with some of the other victims of Karen's thefts. Jim Patterson and I discovered we both enjoyed fishing, and we started making trips to Lake Erie on weekends. The Davies family invited me to their daughter's birthday party, which felt like a real honor. These were relationships that might never have formed if not for our shared experience of being victimized, and then standing up for ourselves. The story of Karen Pemberton's crimes and conviction spread far beyond Greenfield, Ohio. Law schools started using the case as an example of HOA liability and the limits of organizational authority. The Ohio State Legislature even passed a new law, informally called the Meadowbrook Act, that required all HOAs in the state to carry insurance, submit to annual audits, and provide clear processes for residents to appeal fines and violations. My doorbell camera company used a sanitized version of my footage in a commercial about the importance of home security systems. They paid me a modest fee for the rights, which I donated to a local charity that helped victims of financial crimes. It seemed appropriate. Karen Pemberton's name became shorthand in our community for everything an HOA president should not be. When Tom or the other board members were making decisions, someone would inevitably joke, "Let's make sure we are not pulling a Karen here," and everyone would laugh, but there was a serious undertone. No one ever wanted to repeat that nightmare. I heard through the grapevine that Karen's ex-husband, who she had divorced years earlier, gave an interview to a true crime podcast. He described a pattern of manipulative and controlling behavior throughout their marriage, how she always needed to be in charge of everything, how she would punish him and their children with silent treatment if they did not follow her rules. It painted a picture of someone whose need for control and power had been a lifelong issue, not something that suddenly emerged when she became HOA president. Her children, a son named Marcus and a daughter named Bethany, both publicly disowned her. Marcus gave a statement saying, "My mother made her choices, and she has to live with the consequences. I feel terrible for everyone she hurt, and I am just trying to move forward with my own life." Bethany said something similar. "I felt bad for them. They did not ask to have a criminal for a mother, and they seemed like decent people who were genuinely shocked by what she had done." The house that Karen used to live in became just another house on Oak Drive. The new owners repainted it, replaced the fountain with a nice garden like they promised, and became well-liked members of the community. Sometimes, I would walk past it and try to remember what it looked like before, when it was Karen's showcase property, but the memory was already fading. The house had been cleansed of her presence. About 18 months after Karen was sent to prison, I got a strange piece of mail. It was a letter from the Federal Correctional Institution in Alderson, West Virginia, where Karen was serving her sentence. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on lined paper, and Karen's handwriting was surprisingly neat and precise, just like everything else about her. She wrote that she had been going through therapy in prison and had come to realize the harm she had caused. She said she was sorry for stealing my tools and for all the other things she had done. She said she hoped I could forgive her someday, though she understood if I could not. I read the letter 3 times, trying to figure out if it was genuine or just another manipulation. Ultimately, I decided it did not matter. Whether Karen was truly sorry or just saying what she thought she should say, it did not change what she had done or the consequences she was facing. I wrote a brief reply saying I acknowledged her apology, but that forgiveness was not something I was prepared to offer at that time. I told her I hoped she used her time in prison to genuinely change, because the person she had been was someone who hurt a lot of people. I never heard from her again, and I was fine with that. Life moved on. I got a promotion at work, which came with a nice raise. I started dating a woman named Rebecca Santos who worked as a nurse at the county hospital. Rebecca was kind, funny, and had no patience for drama or games, which I appreciated after dealing with Karen's nonsense. We took things slow, but it felt right. Rebecca thought the whole HOA saga was insane when I told her about it. I rent an apartment specifically to avoid HOA drama, she said. But what that woman did goes way beyond drama. That is just straight-up criminal. Tell me about it, I said. I just wanted to live in a quiet neighborhood and not bother anyone. Well, you definitely made your mark, Rebecca said with a smile. You are the guy who took down the evil HOA president. That is a pretty good story, I laughed. It is better in retrospect than it was while it was happening. The 2-year anniversary of the theft of my tool chest came and went without much fanfare. I did take a moment that morning to look out my window at the spot where Karen had parked her Lexus and loaded up my property. It felt like ancient history, something that happened in another lifetime. But I was glad it had happened, in a strange way. It forced me to stand up for myself, and it led to real change in the community. Tom Mitchell decided not to run for re-election as HOA president after his first 2-year term. He said he had accomplished what he set out to do, reforming the organization and restoring trust, and now it was time for someone else to take the reins. A woman named Patricia Donovan, a retired school principal, was elected in his place. She had the same no-nonsense but fair approach that Tom had brought to the position, and the community continued to thrive under her leadership. The documentary filmmaker I had spoken to eventually made his film, which was called Tyranny in the Cul-de-Sac, America's HOA Crisis. It premiered at a film festival and got picked up by a streaming service. I watched it with Rebecca one night, and it was weird seeing myself on screen talking about what happened. They also interviewed Tom, Officer Reynolds, Ada Rachel Sullivan, and several other neighbors. Karen declined to be interviewed from prison, which was probably for the best. The film got good reviews and sparked a national conversation about HOA reform. I received occasional updates about Karen's situation through the legal system. Her appeal was denied, as expected. She was denied early parole at her first hearing. She would likely serve at least 8 years of her 10-year sentence, possibly more depending on her behavior in prison. The restitution was being garnished from her prison wages, though at the rate of a few dollars a month, it would take centuries for her to pay back what she owed. The civil lawsuit resulted in a judgment that essentially took everything Karen had. Her retirement accounts, her savings, everything was seized to pay back the HOA and the individual victims. She would leave prison with nothing but the clothes on her back and a criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. It was harsh, but it was the consequence of years of theft, fraud, and abuse of power. I sometimes wondered what Karen thought about as she sat in her cell in Alderson. Did she regret her choices? Did she blame everyone else for her situation? Did she still believe she had been justified in her actions? I would never know, and I realized I did not really care. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. 3 years after the theft, Meadowbrook Heights was a different place. The paranoia and fear that had characterized the Karen Pemberton era were gone. People decorated their houses for holidays without worrying about violating some obscure rule. Kids played basketball in their driveways without fear of fines. Gardeners planted flowers they actually liked rather than consulting an approved list. The HOA still existed and still enforced reasonable standards, but it did so with common sense and respect for the residents. I proposed to Rebecca on a warm September evening in my backyard. She said yes, and we started planning a small wedding for the following spring. We decided to stay in Meadowbrook Heights after we got married. Despite everything that had happened, or maybe because of it, the community felt like home. We had been through something difficult together and come out stronger on the other side. Tom Mitchell agreed to be my best man, which felt appropriate. Never thought the theft of a tool chest would lead to such a great friendship, he joked when I asked him. Neither did I said. But I guess good things can come from bad situations if you handle them right. Officer Mike Reynolds and his wife came to our wedding. So did Ada Rachel Sullivan and her husband. Jennifer Kowalski, the reporter who had covered the story, sent a lovely card and a generous gift. Even some of the other victims of Karen's thefts showed up to celebrate with us. It was a beautiful day, filled with people who had become important parts of my life because of a shared experience of standing up to injustice. During the reception, Tom gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. Wesley is the kind of person we all should aspire to be, he said. When he saw something wrong, he did not look the other way. He did not accept that things had to be the way they were. He stood up, he called the police, he pressed charges, and he followed through even when it was difficult. Because of his courage, our community is a better place. So let us raise our glasses to Wesley and Rebecca, and to the power of doing the right thing even when it is hard. Everyone clinked glasses and cheered, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for how everything had turned out. Rebecca and I honeymooned in Colorado, spending 2 weeks hiking in the mountains and forgetting about HOAs, theft charges, and all the drama of the previous few years. When we got back to Greenfield, we settled into married life in our little ranch house with its neatly maintained lawn and properly stored tool chest, which I had bolted to the garage floor just to be safe. Life was good. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA continued to function smoothly under Patricia Donovan's leadership. Property values in the subdivision actually increased after the scandal because people appreciated the reforms and the renewed sense of community. Real estate agents marketed houses in our neighborhood by emphasizing the strong, engaged HOA with proper oversight and accountability. I heard that Karen Pemberton was transferred to a different federal facility in Ohio to be closer to her elderly mother, who was in declining health. I did not know if her children had forgiven her or if she had any visitors in prison. Part of me hoped she was genuinely changing and would emerge from prison as a better person. But a larger part of me did not think about her much at all anymore. She was a chapter in my life that had closed, and I was focused on the future. Rebecca got pregnant about a year after we got married, and we started preparing for the arrival of our daughter. We painted the nursery a soft yellow, assembled a crib, and read all the parenting books we could find. I thought about the kind of community I wanted my daughter to grow up in, and I was satisfied that Meadowbrook Heights was that place now. She would grow up in a neighborhood where people looked out for each other, where authority figures were accountable, and where standing up for what is right was valued. On a crisp October morning, almost 5 years to the day after Karen stole my tool chest, I was sitting on my front porch drinking coffee when Patricia Donovan walked by with her dog. She waved and came up to chat. "Wesley, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," she said. "I know we have all said it before, but I was just thinking this morning about how different things could have been if you had not stood up to Karen that day." "I appreciate that, Patricia. But honestly, I was just tired of being pushed around. I did not set out to be any kind of hero." She smiled. "The best heroes never do. They just do what needs to be done when the moment calls for it. Anyway, I wanted you to know that the HOA is in great shape now. We have got a waiting list of people who want to buy houses in Meadowbrook Heights because of our reputation for fair governance. That is your legacy, whether you want it or not." After she left, I sat there thinking about legacies and what we leave behind. Karen Pemberton's legacy was a criminal record, broken relationships, and a cautionary tale about the abuse of power. My legacy, apparently, was helping create a community where people felt safe and respected. I knew which one I preferred. Rebecca came out with her own cup of coffee and sat down beside me, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just about how strange life is," I said. 5 years ago, I never could have imagined any of this. The theft, the trial, meeting you, having a baby on the way. It is all connected in this weird chain of events that started with me being angry about my tools." Rebecca laughed. "Well, I am glad someone stole your tools then. Otherwise, we might never have met. That is a twisted way to look at it, but I guess you are right." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood come to life as people left for work. Kids waited for school buses, and the day began. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary subdivision in Greenfield, Ohio. But to me, it felt extraordinary because it was a life I had helped build by refusing to accept injustice. Karen Pemberton's 16th theft conviction had cost her everything. Her freedom, her house, her reputation, her relationships with her children, and her future. The price of her crimes was steep, but it was just. And more importantly, her downfall had created something positive, a reformed community where people took responsibility and looked out for each other. As I finished my coffee and prepared to start my day, I glanced over at my garage where my tool chest sat safely bolted to the floor. It was just a box full of wrenches and screwdrivers and hammers, nothing particularly special. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that ordinary people have power when they decide to use it, and that standing up to bullies and thieves is always worth the effort. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and another day began in Meadowbrook Heights, peaceful and ordinary and exactly how it should be.